Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Diamond Bradley. Diamond Bradley was born on March 21, 2001, in Clarksville, Tennessee. She has an older brother named Quan, who was 3 years her senior. After her parents, Doris and Philip, separated, forcing Doris to find a quieter and safer environment for her children, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. She moved her children, including Diamond's sibling Quan, to Spring Valley, Illinois, a small town, where relatives are also there. This allowed Diamond and Quan to grow up with their cousins. Spring Valley is a small town located along the Illinois River with a population that was around 5,000 in 2002. Unlike larger towns, Spring Valley has no big shopping malls or tall buildings, but everyone there is very close-knit, relying on each other's support. Doris worked as a cook at a local nursing home for over 15 years, allowing her to provide for her children as they grew up. As Doris's busy schedule sometimes kept her away, her son Quan took on a significant role in caring for his younger sister, Diamond. He took on the roles of a guardian, mentor, and protective older brother, establishing a deep and enduring bond with her. Diamond also spent a lot of time with her cousin Giovanna, who looked so much like her that many people thought they were twins. Doris later had 2 more children, a girl named Malia and a boy named Quentin. Spring Valley was an ideal place to raise a family, but it had limited activities for teenagers. As a young girl at the time, Diamond enjoyed singing, dancing, playing with her siblings, and taking photos. But as social media and smartphones became increasingly popular, Diamond began spending more time online. She gradually began seeking out online friends and connections for social interaction and entertainment purposes. By the time she was 13 years old in 2014, Diamond started actively posting a variety of content on her social media page. Diamond shared her personal life on social media, including her relationships and social engagements. She was especially close to her family, particularly her mother, and often expressed her love and affection for them online. As she entered adulthood, she used social media to seek advice or simply express her thoughts and feelings. She was not immune to the typical struggles of adolescence, sometimes finding it necessary to confide in others or experiencing overwhelming distrust. Although Diamond's family members, including Doris, interacted with her social media posts, she longed for attention and engagement from her peers. Since she had few friends in Spring Valley, her interest in boys started to grow, and she used social media as a digital diary to express her thoughts and feelings. She frequently posted updates, sometimes multiple times a day, allowing others to follow her life and thoughts. During this time, Diamond was very close to her family, but sometimes she felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness and disconnection. To fill this void, she turned to social media, where she openly shared her struggles with forming friendships and expressed her deep longing for affection and attention. Through her posts, and her longing for affection and attention. Through her posts, Diamond openly expressed her honest thoughts and feelings to anyone who would listen. Diamond was a high school student who had recently started dating Nicholas Nelson, and the two seemed like a perfect match. They spent a lot of time together and genuinely seemed to be in love. Despite her youth, Diamond had big ambitions. She wanted to pursue a career in nursing. The Diamond household was filled with love and laughter on January 23, 2018, as friends and family gathered to celebrate Doris's birthday. The evening was filled with warmth and joy, complete with a festive cake, music, and the company of dear loved ones. Doris completely did not foresee that her life was about to change suddenly and tragically. As the party came to a close, guests began to leave around 10 p.m. Doris told her daughter, Diamond, good night, and Diamond went to take a shower. The next morning, Doris got up, just before 7 a.m., to prepare breakfast and get the younger kids ready for school. However, when she went to wake up Diamond, she was nowhere to be found. Her bedroom upstairs was vacant as well. Initially, Doris was not worried, because she understood her daughter's hobby of running to the nearby gas station to buy coffee in the morning. However, as time passed and Diamond still hadn't returned, her worries increased. Diamond does not have his own car, and the weather outside is wet with snow and wind, so won't be able to go for a walk. When Doris tried to call Diamond, her calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual. By 8:30 a.m., DeCoin, Diamond's father, arrived at her house as they had previously arranged. What made him worried was Diamond's unusual silence, who typically made an effort to stay in touch with her family to avoid worrying them. Doris's concern for her daughter, Diamond, grew by the hour. Despite contacting all of Diamond's acquaintances, no one had any information about her whereabouts. DeCoin searched the town but found no sign of her. As the hours passed, Doris experienced a mix of emotions, from fear to anger, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter. This was the longest Diamond had ever gone without contacting her, and Doris's anxiety became unbearable. When her family searched on their own without results, Doris reported her daughter missing to the police at 6 p.m. Police began an investigation immediately. They contacted Diamond's cell phone provider to try to determine the last location of her phone by tracking cell tower signals. A prompt check on the device's activity revealed phone that it was last active at 7:18 a.m. near Tonopah, Illinois, approximately 5 miles northwest of a cell tower. However, this information only narrowed the search area and did not provide a specific location. Following this discovery, the phone stopped working due to a dead battery or deliberate shutdown, as there was no further activity. Diamond's mother anxiously, she to the hope that her niece, Giovanna, who had been in contact with Diamond the previous evening, might be able to provide crucial information. Diamond often shared her thoughts and plans with Giovanna. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, Giovanna revealed a secret to Doris. Diamond had a second phone that she used to access the internet via Wi-Fi, which was unknown to her family. Diamond's brother, Quan, discovered a cell phone in a dresser drawer that was protected by a password and without a cellular plan. This thing surprised Doris. She had no knowledge of her daughter owning a secret phone. Concerned, Doris immediately took the phone to the police, hoping to find clues that would help locate her missing daughter. Upon examination, investigators suspected that the phone was used for activities of which Doris would not have approved. After breaking the lock screen, they encountered additional security requests, requiring individual passwords for each app. However, notifications visible on the lock screen revealed several people inviting Diamond to meet up. The investigation found that Diamond had been using the phone to interact with people on dating platforms, which shocked Doris, but was not a surprise to Giovanna. However, Doris was upset by the discovery because she had always been concerned about her daughter's dating, especially her attraction to older men and the potential dangers of online interactions. As a result, Doris has repeatedly warned Diamond to be cautious when communicating with strangers online, especially since she knew her daughter had a tendency to lie about her age. Diamond's mother and Quan had cautioned her about the risks of growing up too quickly, but she created an online profile that made her appear older anyway. As the search for Diamond continued, law enforcement agencies looked beyond the internet for clues. They spoke with people in the neighborhood, checked nearby stores, and collected surveillance footage to try to find any clues. At Diamond's usual coffee shop, the police found one camera with low-quality video that showed a dark-colored vehicle and its male driver, who appeared to be an adult. With very little evidence to work with, the police focused on this man and carefully examined the video to see if they could find any details that might reveal Diamond's location. To aid in the search for his missing younger sister, Diamond's brother, Quan, traversed nearby towns, posting flyers with her photo and a detailed description. His theory was that she had been abducted and taken outside of their town. He felt that time was limited, and swift action was necessary. He couldn't shake the feeling of guilt for oversleeping that morning and not returning home sooner, as he believed he might have prevented Diamond's disappearance had he done so. On January 25th, Jasmine, another of Diamond's cousins, visited the police station to share crucial information that could aid in locating Diamond. Jasmine discovered a disturbing truth about Diamond's online activity. It was putting her in greater danger. Diamond had been exploring dating websites and noticed ads for paid meetups with men, which piqued her interest. She learned that some men would pay women to meet up with them. What Jasmine found out was that, unknown to everyone, Diamond had been experimenting with this idea. In fact, Diamond had even posted her own ads on adult websites, which explained why her phone's lock screen was filled with notifications. Doris's daughter, Diamond, had been receiving numerous messages from unfamiliar men who responded to her online profiles and advertisements. The majority of these messages were from older men. Doris was shocked and felt guilty as a mother. She could never have imagined that her underage daughter will use this way to make money. Kwan's perspective, however, differed from Doris's. He believed that his mother always balanced between being strict and giving her children independence. Diamond may not have understood the severity of her actions. She may have thought that she would be paid for spending time on dates, especially with older men who she thought would be more generous. She was exploring life with the curiosity and inexperience of youth, unaware of the hidden dangers on those digital platforms. The temptation of easy money for social activities online can be particularly enticing for young girls. The police knew that many young people in Spring Valley felt trapped in a dull routine, spending most of their free time on the internet, a world that their parents didn't fully understand. As a result, many parents were unaware of the online risks their children faced every day. The local police asked the FBI for help in analyzing data from Diamond's main phone to track her movements on the day she disappeared. With the FBI's advanced resources, they were able to map out Diamond's route, indicating she was likely in a moving vehicle due to the speed of her movement. Investigators then reviewed nearby surveillance footage and found 13 vehicles that matched the time and location, but unfortunately, the poor image quality made it impossible to read the license plate numbers. As detectives examined Diamond's digital communications, they focused on her interactions on dating apps and social media platforms. A key clue was a message Diamond sent on the morning of her disappearance to a 26-year-old man known as Jay. He confirmed that he had a romantic connection with Diamond, but stated that he ended contact after learning her true age on the morning of January 24th at 6 a.m. Earlier that morning, Diamond had invited Jay to meet at an IHOP restaurant, but she quickly rescinded the invitation, apologizing and claiming she meant to send the message to someone else. Jay responded with a harmless smiley face at 6:40 a.m. Not long after, Diamond sent a disturbing message saying, "She dying." Doris was consumed by anger and desperation after learning Jay was the last person to see her 16-year-old daughter, Diamond. In her distress, she quickly accused Jay of harming her child. However, Jay had an alibi. He claimed to have spent the entire night at home playing video games with a friend. Although Jay was initially hesitant to reveal the friend's identity, he eventually disclosed that it was Giovanna, Diamond's cousin. This information complicates the investigation, and it also does not help investigators find Diamond. Investigators refocused on the black Jeep, finding more surveillance footage, showing it heading to Putnam County, where Diamond's phone signal disappeared, either because the phone was turned off or the battery ran out. The vehicle became central to the investigation, as authorities believed it could reveal what happened to Diamond. However, the situation took a dire turn on January 27th, 3 days after Diamond was reported missing, when the Putnam County Sheriff's Office received a concerning call before noon. A pedestrian walking down Pebble Path in Granville Township found the body of a young African-American woman in a ditch beside the road. When the head of Putnam County authorities arrived, they realized the woman's death was no accident. She had been intentionally killed. Her body showed multiple wounds on her back, stomach, legs, arms, and hands. The discovery prompted the police chief to recall a recent missing person report from Spring Valley that matched the woman's description, leading him to make an urgent call. The area where Diamond's body was found was a rural landscape covered in snow, with cornfields on either side of a narrow path. The nearest house was several miles away. Unfortunately, part of her body was submerged in water from a brook flowing through a ditch. A close examination of her remains revealed defensive injuries, indicating that she fought back fiercely until the very end. Following this heartbreaking discovery, the lead detective had the difficult task of informing Diamond's family about her tragic death. At 7 p.m., police arrived at the doorstep, and Doris immediately had a foreboding feeling, a sense of impending sorrow. Even before the police spoke, indication of a mother's intuition sensing something was terribly wrong. Kwan came home to an atmosphere of unimaginable grief, faced the harsh reality that Diamond is gone forever. The devastating news that she had been found deceased was too much for him to bear, causing him to faint. When the news spread through the small community, everyone was deeply shaken. Many were worried about letting their children play outside, fearing the suspect might be nearby. To aid in their search, investigators closely examined the security footage of a black Jeep, focusing on key details. The police sought the expertise of a specialized automotive shop, and a technician carefully reviewed the footage. The technician was able to identify the Jeep as a specific model year of the Jeep Wrangler. With this new information, the police searched their databases for Jeep owners in the area who matched the suspect description. After contacting several owners of similar Jeeps, the officers visited a house a few kilometers north of where Diamond's remains were found. When they arrived, a woman answered the door and told them the owner of the black Jeep had moved to a different town called Stander, but unfortunately, she didn't have their new address. Stander, a small community with a population of about 200 people located just 2 miles away, made the search for the suspect less overwhelming. While patrolling the area, the police found a black Jeep Wrangler parked in the driveway of a house. The vehicle belonged to 26-year-old Richard Henderson. On January 24th, Richard had driven to Spring Valley and stopped at a gas station across from the Bradley residence, matching the individual seen in the gas station's surveillance footage. According to the video, he waited at the gas station for a call from a friend, but left before the call came through. The detectives carefully studied Richard's behavior, paying close attention to the pauses in his story and the expressions on his face. In particular, they noticed that he hesitated when they asked him the name of his friend. He revealed that her first name was Diamond, but admitted that he didn't know her last name. As the detectives continued to question him, they skillfully guided the conversation to extract more information. Eventually, Richard confessed to meeting Diamond that day, although their original plans were canceled. However, his alibi raised suspicions. He claimed to have left Diamond at a mobile home, which seemed inconsistent with the direction her phone had been moved. The investigators became suspicious. They decided driving along the route Richard and Diamond had taken that day to gather more information. Starting from the gas station, they drove past the intersection that had been caught on video, over a bridge, and into the rural area of Putnam County. The drive ended where Diamond's phone signal stopped working. What remains of the little girl are stuffed toys and artificial flowers at her memorial next to the streambed. When questioned by the detective about the site, Richard became overcome with emotion, tears streaming down his face. The detective took advantage of this vulnerable moment to press Richard for more information about what had happened. Richard described the incidents that occurred as follows. He and Diamond had gone to a secluded area for a private encounter. Afterward, he asked her to leave his car, but she refused and pulled out a knife. A fight broke out, and Richard claimed he was acting in self-defense. He stated that in an attempt to block her knife, the blade accidentally stabbed her in the abdomen. According to Richard, then she continued to be aggressive, so he disarmed her and hit her twice in what he described as further self-defense. Ultimately, he left her in a nearby ditch. The autopsy results contradicted Richard's story, revealing that Diamond had received over 20 stab wounds, with some of them found on her back. Given the substantial physical disparity between Richard and Diamond, Richard's explanation became extremely improbable. As a fully grown adult, nearly 6 feet tall and weighing twice as much as Diamond, who was just under 5 feet tall, he was attacking a young child. Tragically, Diamond had already lost her life by the time the search for her began. At the funeral, over 200 people came together, including family, friends, classmates, and teachers from Spring Valley High School. Because Doris chose cremation for Diamond, she was able to keep her daughter's remains with her at all times. The thought of leaving Diamond in a graveyard was too difficult for Doris to bear. As a result, she took Diamond's urn with her everywhere she went, even to court during Richard's sentencing. Richard Henderson pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence and was given a 53-year prison term without the possibility of parole. Doris considered ending her life because of the overwhelming sadness of being separated from her daughter, but thinking about her remaining child, Quan, gave her the strength to continue living. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, to Julie Hosteler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new Human Resources Director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29th, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening, which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarland concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. The case of Heather Jackson. Heather Jackson, a 23-year-old mother of two, had just found a house on a quiet street near Lake Erie. She was thrilled to have a new place to call home, especially after separating from her husband Wayne and going through a divorce. Despite the challenges they faced as parents, Heather and Wayne were once a happy couple, but their marriage didn't survive the struggles. After the breakup, Heather faced tough times, but she didn't give up. She focused on making her children, 3-year-old Selena and 1-year-old Wayne Jr., happy. On September 8, 2012, Heather's friend Danielle arrived at a house at 2:30 p.m. as they had planned. However, when Danielle knocked on the door, no one answered. She checked all the doors, but they were locked. This was unusual, as Heather would normally let her know if she had to change plans. Danielle's concern grew as she realized Heather and her children were not at home. Danielle tried to reach Heather by calling her mother, Jody, but was unable to get in touch with her that day. Failing that, Danielle contacted all of Heather's friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. Then Danielle spotted Selena's pacifier on the porch, which made her increasingly anxious. She knew Heather would never leave the house without it. As the hours ticked by with no call from Heather, Jody grew more and more uneasy, her intuition screaming warning signals. She decided to take action and phoned the police, asking them to perform a welfare check. When the officers arrived at the address, they knocked on the door, but received no response. Next, they made their way around the house, peering through the windows, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. With no signs of forced entry or any indication of foul play, they departed. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, friends of Heather, arrived at her house, having learned that she was missing. They knocked on the front door, but there was no response. Reiner then proceeded to the back porch, forced open the door, and entered the home. Upon entering, they discovered Heather's lifeless body in the bedroom, completely naked, and immediately called the emergency services. Sergeant Eric Gray Bill, a police officer with the Sandusky Force, responded to the call and entered Heather Jackson's home. He found Heather's body awkwardly positioned between the box spring and mattress in her bedroom, with a ligature constricting her neck. Notably, the TV in the house was still operational, but the children were absent. Their room was empty. While inspecting the house, the officers came across a door to a utility closet that they hadn't checked yet. Upon opening it, Sergeant Eric Gray Bill was met with a horrific sight. Stacked boxes, and behind them, the lifeless bodies of Heather's children. The police immediately sealed off the area, treating it as a crime scene. The local officers were left stunned, having never encountered anything so heinous in their careers. The brutal murder of innocent children left them struggling to comprehend how someone could commit such an atrocity. The forensic examination results only added to the devastation felt by Heather's family and friends. According to court documents, Dr. Diana Scala Barnett, the deputy coroner for Lucas County, performed autopsies on the 3 victims. She determined that Heather Jackson's cause of death was ligature strangulation, and observed that Heather's rectum was found to be more open than usual after death. Dr. Scala Barnett attributed this to the likely introduction of an object into the rectum around the time of death, which kept it in that state. Dr. Scala Barnett also testified that Wayne Jackson and Selena Jackson died from ligature strangulation. She noted that Selena's underwear had been rolled up, suggesting that the body had been redressed. Furthermore, Selena's rectum showed a similar dilation to her mother's, again indicating that an object was present in her rectum at or around the time of death. Julie Cox, a forensic scientist at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, reported that the anal swabs taken from Selena Jackson contained seminal fluid. Cox also observed a suspicious stain on Selena Jackson's underwear, which she excised and tested, finding it to contain a sperm cell. The police were under pressure to swiftly identify and apprehend the culprit behind these heinous crimes. Heather's residence was conveniently located near Firelands Regional Medical Center, and investigators believed that surveillance footage from the building's CCTV cameras might aid in their search for the perpetrator. Upon reviewing the footage, they spotted a car pulling up to Heather's house at 10:57 p.m. However, the camera's distance from the house and the darkness hindered visibility. The car's headlights provided the only clues, revealing that the vehicle had backed into the driveway and remained stationary for some time. 11 minutes later, at 11:08 p.m., the headlights flickered back to life, and the driver departed the scene. Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, the 2 men who found Heather's body, were taken to the police station for questioning. Dan, who had been friends with Heather, was the first to be interrogated. He explained that when he learned Heather was missing, he went to her house to check on her. Dan admitted that he had to push the door hard to gain entry, and as a result, the police asked him to provide DNA samples. He consented, and a swab was taken from his mouth. After that, he was released. Next, the investigators questioned Thomas Hansen. He revealed that he had spoken to Heather over the phone the previous night and was near her house around 11 p.m. According to Thomas, he drove up to Heather's house but didn't enter. They chatted briefly outside, and then he drove home. This information helped the investigators identify the car seen on the CCTV footage as belonging to Thomas. Thomas also claimed that he didn't enter Heather's house that night because she wasn't alone. There was a man, known to him as Josh, inside with her. Hansen's statement echoed Reiner's. He claimed that upon learning of Heather's disappearance, he rushed to her house to investigate. After providing a DNA sample, he was released by the police. The police shifted their focus to Josh, who was at Heather's house shortly before her death. They quickly determined his whereabouts and brought him in for questioning. Josh acknowledged having known Heather for several years. He confessed to being at her house that night, stating that they watched TV while the kids slept in their room. He also mentioned visiting the store to buy breakfast for the children, returning to the house and staying for a while before a friend picked him up around 1 a.m. Notably, Josh admitted to having consensual, intimate contact with Heather. The investigators visited the store where Josh claimed to have purchased breakfast for the kids and reviewed the CCTV footage. The footage confirmed Josh's alibi, showing him entering the store at 11:20 p.m. However, this did not rule out the possibility that he was involved in the crime. As the last known person to have contact with Heather, Josh remained the prime suspect. Josh also provided a DNA sample, which was analyzed along with those of Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner. The lab results cleared Hansen and Reiner, as their DNA did not match the DNA found on the victims' bodies. Josh's DNA, on the other hand, matched the DNA found on Heather's body, but not on her children's bodies. This indicated that there was another man present in the house that night. Josh had previously confessed to being in a romantic relationship with Heather, which accounted for his DNA being present on her body. However, the police were now tasked with identifying a different individual whose DNA matched the DNA found on the bodies of all three victims. The investigators quickly ruled out Heather's husband Wayne, who was in the process of divorcing her, as a suspect because he lived in a different state. The detectives then focused on Heather's cell phone records, hoping to find some answers. Upon receiving the report, they discovered that Heather had been very active on her phone, right up until the night of her death. Her last phone conversation took place at 3:12 a.m. and lasted 30 seconds. The police now needed to identify the owner of the phone number she had called. 36 hours after Heather's death, the police obtained additional CCTV footage. While analyzing it, the investigators noticed a white car pulling up to her house at around 3 a.m. This coincided with the time Heather stopped using her phone, which might not have been a coincidence. The officers also saw that the white car drove away about an hour later, around the time when Heather, Selena, and Wayne were likely already dead. Although the footage quality was poor and didn't allow the police to see the license plates, they were able to determine that the car was a Cadillac. Once the investigators received information from the phone company about the owner of the phone number Heather had called, they had a lead. The number belonged to 41-year-old Curtis Clinton. It was with him that Heather had her 30-second phone conversation at 3:12 a.m. Curtis Clinton's background check revealed alarming details. Police records showed that Clinton was released from prison in February after serving a 13-year sentence for 2 counts of felonious assault and involuntary manslaughter. He had pleaded guilty to the 1997 murder of 18-year-old Misty Keckler from Fostoria, who was found strangled, naked, and bound in a bathtub. The similarity to Heather's case, combined with the fact that Clinton was released from prison just 6 months prior to Heather and her children's death, raised concerns among investigators. It seemed possible that Clinton had reverted to his previous violent behavior. Furthermore, Clinton owned a white Cadillac, which made him the prime suspect. The police urgently needed to locate him to prevent any further harm. If Clinton was indeed responsible for the murders, he had to be stopped before he could harm anyone else. The police went to Clinton's last known address, but he was not there. A few hours later, a patrol officer found a white Cadillac on a nearby street, but Clinton himself was still missing. A search of the vehicle revealed a receipt from a gas station on the night of the crime. The investigators headed to the gas station to review the CCTV footage. On the recordings, they identified Clinton and his distinctive white Cadillac. Despite already knowing that Heather and her children were deceased, Clinton was seen purchasing water and beer, displaying a calm demeanor. Fearing Clinton might flee, the investigators nonetheless soon received a tip that a patient named Curtis Clinton had been admitted to a local hospital. They swiftly arrived at the hospital and apprehended the suspect they were pursuing. Clinton was arrested and taken into custody, but he vehemently denied any involvement in the tragic deaths of Heather Jackson and her children. During questioning, Clinton revealed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Heather for 5 months, providing her with both financial and emotional support to cope with her numerous personal issues. Clinton claimed to have limited knowledge of Heather's children and stated that he last saw Heather on Tuesday, September 6th. He alleged that on that day, he gave her $328 and they engaged in an intimate encounter. The investigator told Clinton that phone records revealed a 3:12 a.m. call with Heather on September 8th. Clinton corrected himself, saying he had gotten his days wrong, and it was actually Friday night or early Saturday morning when he last saw Heather, not Thursday night. According to Clinton, he didn't stay at her house for long, dropping off the money and engaging in intimate contact before leaving. He explained, "I did my thing and left, but couldn't recall what time he got home." Clinton claimed that someone else must have gone to Heather's house after he left. He said that while he was with Heather, she mentioned that somebody had texted or called her, and she seemed irritated. When informed that he was the last person who had contact with Heather, Clinton denied. However, the examination indicated the opposite. The DNA on the bodies of all 3 victims belonged to Curtis Clinton. Therefore, he was arrested and placed in the county jail. Curtis Clinton was charged with multiple counts during the investigation. It also turned out that 6 days before the death of Heather and her children, Curtis Clinton attacked a 17-year-old girl whose identity was not disclosed by the police. He choked her and forced her to have intimate contact with him. When he let her go, she went to the hospital, and the police at the hospital doctors took DNA samples from her body, which also led to Curtis Clinton. Clinton moved for a change of venue, arguing that extensive media coverage had saturated the county at the time of the offenses, and was likely to resume once the trial started. The trial court denied the motion for a change of venue, stating that while the pre-trial publicity was extensive and adverse to the defendant, the publicity was not sufficiently prejudicial that readers and viewers could not realistically shut it from sight. The court rejected claims of presumed prejudice, stating that the defendant, Curtis Clinton, did not hesitate to take the lives of Heather, Selena, and Wayne, and that his DNA was found inside Selena's body before she died. Clinton knew he was facing the death penalty, but he did not want to die and therefore did everything to achieve a different outcome in the trial. He even remembered what justice was when allowed to speak before being sentenced for the capital crimes. Clinton neither begged for his life nor apologized to the victim's family. Instead, he lashed out at the prosecutor, Kevin Baxter, and vowed he would win on appeal and have his case retried. He stated, "I don't respect the prosecutor, and as I said, I will be back again. I know there's a lot of people who are upset here, but I'm the one who's going through this." This statement triggered a disgusted response from some of the 70 people present at the hearing in November 2013. Curtis Clinton was given the death penalty for the murders of Heather Jackson and her 2 young children. When he learned he would be executed by lethal injection, Clinton became violent towards Heather's brother, who expressed a preference for Clinton to die in prison at the hands of other inmates. Deputies and court staff restrained Clinton, who was handcuffed, and pushed him into a chair, while other officers restrained Heather's brother as they exchanged profanities in a packed Erie County courtroom. Heather's brother was angry, stating that the only thing Clinton should be grateful for is that his life was spared by being placed on death row, and that he wished Clinton had been given a life sentence in prison, allowing his friends to harm him. The judge also sentenced Clinton to life in prison without parole for the murder of 3-year-old Selena, and an additional 10 years in prison for assaulting a 17-year-old girl 6 days before the murder of Heather and her children. In 2018, the Ohio Supreme Court postponed Curtis Clinton's execution, which was scheduled for September 15, 2021, pending the exhaustion of all state post-conviction proceedings, including any appeals. As of now, Curtis Clinton remains on death row, and his sentence has been upheld, but his execution will not take place in the near future. Ohio is currently holding over 100 inmates on death row, but Governor Mike DeWine is doubtful that any of them will be executed in the remaining 3 years of his term. The last execution in the state took place on July 18, 2018, and since then, Ohio has had an effective halt on capital punishment. According to Governor DeWine, the reason for this is that lethal injection is the only approved method of execution in Ohio. But pharmaceutical companies have threatened to retaliate if the state uses their products for this purpose. This would have a significant impact on the state's health department and other agencies. The governor has told the state legislature that the only way to resume executions is to change the law to permit alternative methods of execution. But so far, the legislature has not taken any action, and DeWine does not expect them to do so. The case of Whitney Hostler. Dayton is a city in Montgomery County, Ohio, United States, with a population of over 137,000. On July 27th of this year, Whitney Hostler was born into a dog family of 2 sisters. However, their parents' marriage was in trouble. 2 years after Whitney was born, tensions between her parents led to their separation. Due to the mother's health problems, full custody was given to the father, resulting in little contact with her growing up. Whitney was a cheerful and sociable girl. She had a strong creative instinct and loved to draw. Recognizing her talent, her father sent her to art school to hone her skills. Whitney's creativity was evident in all aspects of her life. As an adult, she loved to experiment with makeup and fashion, and even brought her creativity to home renovations. When Whitney was 12, her mother, Kimberly, improved and decided to move back in with her family. By then, Whitney's older sister, Chelsea, had grown up, got a job, and moved out of her father's house. Whitney, the youngest daughter, continued to live with her father. Kimberly wanted her daughters to live with her. However, reconnecting with Chelsea was difficult because she had her own life and did not feel the need for her mother's presence. But Whitney was interested in the idea of communicating with her mother. They began to see each other, went out, and became close. Eventually, Whitney moved in with her. For the next few years, she lived with her mother and continued to communicate with her father. At age 15, while in high school, Whitney met a boy named Randy Ryder. They were attracted to each other and gradually developed a romantic relationship. The relationship lasted for several years before Whitney introduced Randy to her parents and attended a family dinner at Ryder's. Their relationship was strong and they became inseparable. They finished school together, started working, and made plans to attend college. In 2017, Whitney discovered she was pregnant at the age of 22. Although the pregnancy was unplanned, the couple and their families took the news positively. The couple's parents were supportive, seeing the birth of their child as an opportunity to complete their family. Randy's parents, who were recently retired and had a lot of free time, offered to help the couple with childcare. Since Whitney and Randy needed to pursue their education and build their lives, they happily accepted Randy's parents' offer. The couple soon moved to St. Paris, a small town in Ohio with less than 2,000 residents, where Randy's family lived. For the first few months after moving in, while Whitney was pregnant, they lived in a one-room apartment and worked. After their daughter was born, they decided to move into Randy's parents' home. This move made their lives significantly easier, allowing them to balance school and work more effectively. It was also financially beneficial, as they did not have to spend a large portion of their income on rent. In addition, the grandparents were able to spend more time with their granddaughter. In addition to Randy's parents, his younger brother lived there as well. They all lived together as a large family. The friendly family supported each other, and everything seemed perfect. On October 1st, 2020, Randy visited the police station to report his Whitney disappearance. He stated that the last time he saw her was on the evening of September 30th, following an argument between them. After the fight, he went out to meet friends. The conflict continued with his mother, Valerie, but Randy did not stay to see how it resolved. He explained that he and Whitney had planned to spend the evening together, but she decided to stay home. A few hours later, his friends were supposed to pick her up in a car to go have fun together. Randy admitted that at the appointed time, his friend came for Whitney. However, she was not waiting in the driveway as they had agreed. The friend called her several times, but Whitney ignored the calls. He waited for her in the car near the house for some time, but then concluded that perhaps someone else had picked her up or her plans had changed. So he did not waste time and went to the party where he expected to meet her. When Randy arrived at the party, Whitney had not shown up, which worried him. He tried calling her several times, but she did not answer. Randy contacted his parents, who were home. They told him that Whitney had left shortly after him, getting into a car with a friend. Randy's mother, Valerie, saw an unfamiliar car pull into the driveway and watched Whitney get into the car. However, she could not tell who was in the car or how many people were inside because the windows were tinted. Whitney stopped communicating after that and was never seen again. Randy waited another day, hoping she would be with friends. Randy tried to find out who Whitney had left with, but eventually decided to contact the police for assistance. Initially, the police were skeptical of Randy, as people close to the victim are often considered in such cases. However, Randy's story was supported by his parents and friends. Randy's parents saw him leave for the party without Whitney, and he stayed there until his mother told him that Whitney had left on her own. His mother corroborated Randy's story, verifying that he had been at the party when Whitney disappeared. The police contacted Whitney's mother to gather more information about her whereabouts. Whitney's mother insisted that Whitney wouldn't just run away, as she was a responsible mother devoted to her child and wouldn't leave for long. With this information, the case didn't seem to be a simple disappearance, leading the police to begin a search for Whitney. Then, a man noticed something unusual while hiking in the woods near Kaiser Lake in Ohio. At the bottom of a cliff, he saw a person lying face down. Thinking it might be a tourist who had fallen, he tried calling out to them but got no response. He decided not to risk climbing down the cliff and instead contacted emergency services. Emergency responders arrived quickly and used specialized equipment to descend the steep cliff. When they got to the victim, it was clear that she was dead. The victim was a young woman and responders immediately noticed signs of strangulation on her neck and face. This ruled out a fall as a cause of death. Unfortunately, the victim had no identification on her. Police had to rely on her clothing and other identifying features, such as earrings, to try to identify her. The police reviewed recent missing person reports and quickly found a match. A forensic expert had identified the victim as Whitney. The forensic investigation confirmed that Whitney died from strangulation. Police began to investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. After examining the last hours of her life, they found that she had been in contact with her Randy, his father Rodney Sr., his mother Valerie, and younger brother Rodney Jr., who all lived in the same house. The police went to the Randy family's house but only found Randy's brother there. Rodney Jr. told them that his parents had taken their granddaughter and gone hunting. The police decided to talk to Rodney Jr. first. It was discovered that Rodney Jr. had been at work from early in the morning until late at night on the day Whitney went missing. This was confirmed by his co-workers and surveillance camera footage. When he returned home, Whitney had been dead for several hours, so Rodney Jr. was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Randy he had been at a party during the time Whitney went missing and was not considered a suspect. However, many questions remained for Randy's parents. Randy's mother, Valerie, was the only witness to see the girl leave the house and get into an unknown car after their son left. But no one else saw this. Randy's parents returned home 6 hours later, covered in mud. They claimed they had gone deer hunting in the woods, although there was considerable doubt about this. Valerie was able to describe the car Whitney had been in before she disappeared. But they did not see the license plate or the driver and did not take it seriously. Randy's parents did not pay much attention to the car because they knew Whitney was supposed to be picked up and taken to a party. They assumed that her friends had picked her up when she calmly got into the car, suggesting that she knew the driver. Around 7 p.m., as darkness fell, the police left the Randy family home. They had not gathered any useful information from witnesses and decided to check the area of the street where Whitney had disappeared. Randy's parents reported seeing a suspicious dark burgundy car with tinted windows parked there. The car sat next to the family's white pickup truck until Whitney left the house and got into the car. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area. As the police passed the pickup, they accidentally noticed some suspicious items in its open bed. Inside, they found several black garbage bags with remnants of adhesive tape, along with women's gloves caked in mud. The collection of items did not resemble those typically used for hunting. The officers were aware that garbage bags and tape are often associated with covering up murders. The items appeared to have been used to restrain someone and then quickly discarded. On the tape, police found several strands of hair stuck together, similar in color and length to Whitney's. There was also a large two-wheeled luggage cart that looked dirty, indicating it had been recently driven on a dirt road. Initially, police did not alert the cart's owner to their discovery. However, they began to suspect the family's involvement in Whitney's disappearance. The police calmly returned to the house and requested to inspect the Whitney room. They aimed to conduct a search and obtain her mobile phone and computer for analysis. Valerie permitted the police to enter. Police inspected the Whitney room and found the She mobile phone, along with an almost empty roll of tape identical to the one found in the pickup truck. Hair was present on the tape. Officers reported this finding to the homeowners and requested an explanation. Randy's parents remained calm and began answering questions. They explained that Whitney had been cleaning her room and that her hair may have gotten caught in the tape while she was combing her hair. She had recently been sick, causing her hair to fall out, which everyone, including Randy, confirmed. Despite their confident statements, the police suspected that Valerie and her husband Randy were lying, and the explanation of hair falling out and getting stuck in the tape seemed implausible. The police did not notice any change in their behavior as they explained the evidence. However, after a while, Randy's father became very emotional. He was breathing heavily, could not sit still, and took a long time to answer each question the police asked. They found his behavior suspicious and decided to question him further at the police station. He was taken there and repeated the same story as his son. According to him, there had been a serious argument just before Whitney left for the party. The conflict began with Whitney and Randy arguing in their room. Randy's mother Valerie intervened when Whitney became angry, she claiming that she had evidence that Randy was cheating on her and was determined to break up with him. Not only did she intend to leave him, but she also intended to take her daughter back to her mother's house. During the argument, Valerie entered the room when she heard the commotion, trying to calm Whitney down. Meanwhile, Randy, upset about the situation, went to a party by himself. According to Valerie, after calming Whitney down, she left with her friends in an unknown car, leaving everyone uncertain about her whereabouts. Randy's father later confirmed that his son had been unfaithful and had a mistress. This came to light when the mistress reported that she was pregnant, just days before Whitney went missing. Whitney believed that the child was her husband's and the mistress's, which caused her to leave him. The situation seemed suspicious, especially since Randy had withheld this information during the initial interrogation and his family had a motive for wanting to get rid of Whitney. Randy was also questioned by the police. He was asked why he had not mentioned the argument over the mistress. Randy said that he had not told the police right away because he thought it was irrelevant to the search for Whitney and did not want to incriminate himself. At the time, Whitney's death was unknown. However, the police believe that this fact, combined with the conflict with Randy's parents, sealed Whitney's fate. Randy confirmed his father's account, admitting that during the argument, he and Whitney were in his room on the second floor. Whitney initiated the argument, accusing him of cheating and declaring she would end their relationship and move out with her daughter. When his mother got involved, they continued the discussion loudly and went downstairs. Eventually, the argument subsided, but Randy heard some strange. A few minutes later, his father walked into Randy's room, clearly agitated, and made an unusual request. He asked Randy to leave the house for a few days and make public appearances so people would know where he was. Without questioning what had happened, Randy packed his things and went to see his friends, with whom he had planned to hang out that night. He never saw Whitney again. Randy's behavior seemed strange, and the police were puzzled as to why he would leave the house at his father's request without asking about the situation downstairs. Randy explained that he was upset and distracted by problems with his mistress, so he trusted his parents. He assumed that his father was asking him to take a few days off, so that Whitney could cool down after their argument. Because of their conflict, Randy did not look for her and left without her. Everyone at the party assumed that Whitney was not there because of their argument. No one suspected that she might have disappeared or been harmed. The party guests noticed Randy's sadness throughout the evening. He tried calling Whitney several times, but she did not answer. He did not really know what was wrong with her and thought that she was ignoring him because of their argument. However, Randy understood that she could not have simply disappeared. Even if they split, they still have many related issues to resolve, including child custody. Finally, Randy went to the police, and Whitney's body was later discovered at the bottom of a ravine. All evidence pointed to Randy's parents as the perpetrators, having killed Whitney on the first floor and then disposing of her body to make it look like a suicide. However, experienced forensic experts and police saw through the deception. The police informed Valerie, Randy, and his family that Whitney's body was not found. This was to emotionally shock them and to see how the suspects would react. After the news of the death was announced, the police noticed how Randy's family members reacted. Randy's father immediately became concerned, but not because he was sad about Whitney's death. It was clear that he was hiding something and was afraid of being found out. In response, the police decided to make a bold move. They showed Randy's father photos of the scene where Whitney was found. Upon seeing the horrifying images of his niece's mother's body, the man broke down, revealing his guilt. This psychological tactic helped expose his involvement. The man started speaking, stating that on the day Whitney disappeared, he was napping in the bedroom on the first floor. He was jolted awake by a loud, suspicious noise. The disturbance from the next room lasted for several minutes. Concerned, he got up to see what was happening. When he entered the adjacent bedroom, he found Whitney lying motionless on the bed, face up. A bag was tightly taped around her neck. Next to the bed, Valerie stood holding a roll of adhesive tape. The man reported being in shock, with the next few hours feeling like a blur. His wife told him that she was filled with rage upon realizing she would never see her granddaughter again, which led her to instinctively strangle Whitney. The man quietly assisted his wife in disposing of the body, acting mechanically. Before this, he had sent his son away to prevent him from witnessing the incident. After the son left, the man returned to the room where Valerie was trying to place the body in large plastic bags. He described himself as being in a strange state, silently watching in pain but unable to act. He remained in a stupor until his wife asked him to bring a two-wheeled cart and a large bag. After Valerie and her husband managed to pack Whitney's body, they loaded it into the back of a pickup truck. They returned to the house and stayed there for a while as Valerie decided where to dispose of the body. She chose a cliff near the lake. Since they couldn't leave Whitney's 2-year-old daughter alone in the house, they placed her in the back seat of the truck. They arrived at the location late at night. The child was asleep and unaware that her mother's body was being disposed of at that moment. The most tragic part is that Whitney's death was caused by people she considered close and trusted. After dumping the body, the couple gathered trash bags, duct tape, a bag, and a cart, intending to dispose of the evidence later. The police later discovered the evidence, and they never had a chance to dispose of it. During the interrogation, Valerie remained calm and emotionless. While she was in another room, the police interviewed each suspect separately, and Valerie did not know that her husband had confessed until the very end. She still insisted that Whitney had left in an unknown car. However, Valerie's demeanor changed dramatically when police informed her of her husband's confession from the next room. No longer needing to pretend, she admitted to strangling Whitney, corroborating her husband's statement. As the only person present at the time of the victim's death, Valerie could finally recount what happened on that fateful evening. According to the woman, a heated argument erupted between Whitney and Randy upstairs. When Whitney threatened to leave with the child, the woman intervened. Whitney became enraged, threatening to cut off all contact between the child and her grandparents. Valerie was terrified that Whitney would follow through on her threats. The thought of losing contact with her beloved granddaughter was unbearable. In a moment of desperation, Valerie lost control and attacked Whitney, strangling her. Valerie described the incident as a moment of insanity, claiming she never intended to kill Whitney. Despite this, the physical evidence suggested otherwise, with marks on Whitney's body indicating a violent struggle. Valerie claimed that they had argued. After the bag was placed around Whitney's neck, Valerie appeared in the doorway, dazed with shock. Valerie then ordered her husband to send Randy away to provide him with an alibi. Valerie's confession matched this account. She claimed that the attack occurred while she was emotionally distressed, implying that she did not realize what she was doing. This confession was particularly disturbing to the police, as the murder was committed in front of a child and the body was disposed of with the child present. Valerie and her husband were arrested, but Randy was not, due to lack of evidence against him. This caused public outrage, as neighbors and relatives of the deceased believed that Randy was involved in the crime. They suspected that Randy's parents had covered for him so that he could retain custody of the children and remain free. Suspicions grew because Randy had left the scene of the murder and had previously concealed information from the police. Additionally, his father had advised him to have an alibi, which further cast doubt on his innocence. People questioned whether a 52-year-old woman could have overpowered the young, healthy Whitney. Despite these suspicions, Randy denied all charges and passed a polygraph test, which resulted in him being cleared of all charges. In preparation for trial in December 2020, Randy's Rodney Sr. father pursued a plea deal. In exchange for his cooperation, he received a 3-year prison sentence and was released on March 28, 2023. Valerie Ryder's trial began in February 2021, where her defense attorneys proclaimed her innocence and argued that Whitney had been abducted and killed by someone else. They also implicated Randy's father, Rodney Sr., as the real culprit. However, the prosecution effectively countered these claims by introducing DNA evidence linking Valerie to the crime. Both her husband and son testified against her, leaving little hope for the defense. Ultimately, the jury found Valerie Ryder guilty of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence, and sentenced her to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 21 years, in 2041. Austin Malcolm Haruf, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Haruf family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first vlog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had 2 distinct physical states, a normal state, and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comment section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, Austin explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin and physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffrey Pfizer, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffrey tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffrey headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffrey realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Stevens family's house, and now strange animal-like noises, resembling the growls of a wild beast, could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive. But by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. 2 officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood, with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek. And his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stab wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Harrouf attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. The case of Hannah Potts. After Hannah Potts, 23, went missing, an investigation involving the FBI began. The case received a lot of media attention, and the unraveling of the mysterious disappearance shocked many people. Hannah grew up in a large family in Gibson County, Indiana, a rural area where many people make a living from farming. Her family owned a small farm, which her parents considered a safe and ideal place to work, live, and raise their children. The summer of 2020 was a turning point for Hannah's family, after which their lives changed forever. On July 23, Hannah was struggling with insomnia. She told her mother that she was going to go out for a walk around the farm, check on the animals, and maybe take some pictures. Hannah then took her phone and camera and left the house and headed toward the barn. The next morning, the family was shocked to discover Hannah was missing. Adding to their worries, a disturbing post appeared on her Facebook page, a video, largely black, suggesting it had been recorded in the dark. Hannah desperately pleaded, "Mom, can you hear me? Please talk to me, I really need to hear your voice right now. Something bad happened. I was taking pictures of animals and the man grabbed me. I think he was trying to scare me. He was about as tall as Jerry and had a deep voice. He said he wanted to help me, but I didn't believe him. I'm in a room with 4 walls and a little light. I have my phone with me and I want you to know that they know about this. Please talk, you have to tell the police everything that's going on. They can find me by looking at the videos or pictures on my phone." That man mentioned Ohio, but I'm not sure exactly where. Please tell everyone that I love them, and if I don't make it back, know that I love you all very much. Hannah's parents quickly alerted the police, and given the circumstances and the fact that even minutes can change everything in such cases, the FBI launched an investigation. News of the abduction spread quickly on social media and was picked up by major television stations across the country by the end of the day. Extensive media coverage was garnered, with a large number of volunteers joining Hannah's family in distributing thousands of informational flyers. The flyers included a description of Hannah's last known appearance. She was wearing a gray shirt and sweatpants when she was last seen at home around 2 a.m. The abductor's vehicle, a maroon sedan, was also described. Police appealed to the public for any information that could assist the investigation. Hannah's family used every resource at their disposal to find her, including using social media to quickly spread information about the abduction. Hannah's twin sister, Lauren, created a social media post to spread the word and seek support. The post read, "She is reaching out with a heavy heart, and she never thought she would be in this situation. She needs the help of her friends and family. Please share this post and the attached photo. If you have any information about her twin sister Hannah's disappearance, please contact the Princeton, Indiana Police Department or her family." Hannah posted a video earlier describing her kidnapping, and Lauren is desperate for her safe return home. The FBI attempted to locate Hannah by tracking her cell phone. On the day of her kidnapping, a cell tower a few miles from Hannah's family home picked up a signal from her phone. Around 6 a.m., Hannah posted a video to her Facebook page, but by then she was in custody. Her phone continued to pin to a nearby cell tower, indicating that she was likely being held at a location not far from her family home. Meanwhile, police had a lead on a suspect driving a maroon car, but they were unable to find anyone matching the description within a 5-mile radius of Hannah's home. While digging into Hannah's life and trying to find out if anyone she knew could be involved in her disappearance, police discovered that before she went missing, she had been in contact with a 34-year-old woman named Maria Hopper, who lived just a mile from their home. Police arrived to speak with Maria, who confirmed that she knew Hannah but said that she had last seen her a few days before the kidnapping. This seemed like another dead end, but when police obtained a cell phone carrier report and were able to access Hannah's social media page, where she had posted her heartbreaking plea, it became clear that Maria Hopper had lied when she said she had seen Hannah a few days before the kidnapping. Hannah went missing in the early morning hours of July 24th. 2 days later, on July 26th, police visited Maria's home. During this visit, Maria told police that she had no information about Hannah's whereabouts. Maria's boyfriend, Joshua Thomas, 45, was also present and claimed he did not know Hannah. The police asked Maria for permission to look around the house. The woman reluctantly agreed but immediately stated that Hannah was not in her house. The police found nothing suspicious inside except for a staircase in the kitchen leading down to the basement. Maria said that there was nothing but unnecessary things in the basement, but the police decided to check the basement themselves. In the basement, the police discovered a strange piece of plywood that stood out among the other dusty items. Its cleanliness suggested that it had not been stored there as long as the other items. Furthermore, it appeared to be blocking the entrance to a separate area of the basement. As an officer began to remove the plywood, Maria interjected with an important statement. Before we continue, however, let's review the recording Hannah made. When shared on social media, many were quick to point out the strangeness and incongruity of Hannah's actions in the video. She recorded a 6-minute video, raising questions about why she prioritized her time filming instead of calling for help immediately. It is also unclear why the kidnapper did not search her and confiscate her phone. The purpose of the video is also puzzling, especially since it was filmed at 2 a.m. on a farm. Additionally, her initial claim of being kidnapped by a man was later contradicted when she mentioned they, referring to multiple kidnappers. Despite having internet access and the ability to post on social media, she did not use this opportunity to identify her location and potentially seek help. Police have noted unusual behavior surrounding Hannah's disappearance. However, since people react differently to stress, they initially treated her disappearance as a kidnapping. The investigation was ongoing until police obtained records of communications between Hannah and Maria, which led to a breakthrough. At Maria's home, when an officer asked about a piece of plywood in the basement, Maria confessed that Hannah had been hiding behind it. The officer then pushed the plywood aside and ordered her to come toward him. When Hannah emerged, the officer found her right hand cuffed and her legs still working. The woman immediately admitted to the police that no one had kidnapped her and that she was sitting in the basement of her own free will. It turned out that Hannah had planned her own kidnapping with the assistance of Maria Hopper and Joshua Thomas. This became clear through their social media exchanges. The tone, content, and context of the messages read like fiction. The three were taken to the police station for further investigation after their arrest. As the police tried to understand the motive behind the incident, Hannah explained that she was an aspiring author writing a book. In an effort to gain inspiration and gain a deeper understanding of the experiences of kidnapping victims, Hannah decided to stage her own fake kidnapping. To achieve this, she enlisted the help of her friends Maria and Joshua, who became characters in her story. According to Hannah, her friends helped her plan and carry out the fake kidnapping by hiding her in their basement, providing her with food and drinks, and deliberately destroying her cell phone to avoid detection by the police. Hannah filmed a video of the alleged kidnapping and posted it on her Facebook page, causing great concern and distress to her family and others. Hannah rehearsed the video for about a week before making it without telling her family members about her plans. After the truth was revealed, her family apologized to everyone involved in the search and those who were concerned for her safety. Hannah's sister, Lauren, took to social media to publicly apologize and express her feelings about the situation. In her statement, Lauren said her family was deeply hurt and embarrassed by Hannah's actions, and they felt betrayed. Lauren made it clear that she no longer wanted any relationship with her sister and hoped Hannah would be held accountable for her actions. Lauren also addressed her concerns about Hannah's story targeting a person of color with a specific description of the car. She prayed that no one would be unfairly targeted or harmed because of her sister's false statements. Additionally, Lauren expressed regret for the pain her family has endured, including her 6-year-old son, who was deeply affected by Hannah's dishonesty. Hannah Potts kept a personal journal in her friend's basement in which she wrote that she expected her social media post to go viral. As a result of her actions, she is now facing charges of falsely reporting her own abduction. According to Gibson County Prosecutor Michael Cochran, Hannah's actions were not only criminal, but also caused significant distress to her family and everyone around her. Furthermore, by providing a false description of her alleged abductor, Hannah put innocent people at risk of mistaken identity. Furthermore, the case wasted valuable time and resources as multiple law enforcement agencies were involved in the investigation. In a time of limited resources, these wasted hours can never be recovered. Prosecutor Cochran stressed that such a callous disregard for others will not be tolerated. Maria Hopper and Joshua Thomas were charged with perjury and assisting in the concealment of a kidnapping hoax. During a police interview, Hopper admitted to picking up Hannah Potts from her home and lying about hiding her. Thomas also admitted to knowing about the staged kidnapping and Hannah's presence in his home. All 3 individuals are free on bail and awaiting trial. In September 2020, Hannah Potts pleaded guilty to filing a false kidnapping report. As a result, she was sentenced to 1 year of probation and 120 hours of community service. Joshua Thomas and Maria Hopper were also sentenced to probation. Some people who know this story believe that Hannah Potts faked her kidnapping to inspire her book and to attract attention to herself, which she hoped would boost her book's sales. The case of Lacey Peterson. Lacey Rocha was born on May 4, 1975, to Sharon and Dennis, but her parents divorced when she and her older brother Brent were still young. After the divorce, Lacey's mother married Ron, a dairy farmer, who became a father figure to her and played a significant role in her upbringing. Lacey was a cheerful and outgoing person with an infectious smile and bubbly nature. She loved talking to people and was always eager to engage in conversations, which made her a natural attention seeker. She thrived in social situations and was known for her ability to light up a room with her presence. Growing up on a dairy farm, Lacey developed a strong connection with nature. She spent much of her childhood exploring the outdoors and enjoying the beauty that surrounded her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother, which became a source of joy and fulfillment for both of them. Lacey's love for gardening would later influence her interests and career choices as an adult. Lacey was a cheerleader at Thomas Downey High School, which was a great fit for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She made a strong impression on her school and became the ideal cheerleader. After graduating, Lacey attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture due to her interest in plants and wildlife. Lacey frequently visited a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a co-worker of her friend. Lacey was immediately attracted to Scott and was smitten. She took the initiative and gave Scott her phone number. Scott quickly reached out, and they surprisingly hit it off during their first conversation. Scott then asked Lacey on their first date, a deep-sea fishing trip. However, things didn't go as planned for Lacey, who ended up getting seasick. After a rocky start, Lacey and Scott's relationship blossomed, and they eventually decided to live together. Before meeting Lacey, Scott had aspirations to become a professional golfer, but as their relationship progressed, his focus shifted, and he chose to pursue a career in business instead. Lassie graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, and Scott followed suit the next year. This milestone marked the beginning of a new era in their lives, full of promise and potential. On August 9, 1997, the couple tied the knot in Isla Valley, San Luis Obispo County. The beautiful resort setting provided a stunning backdrop for their special day. Surrounded by friends and family, they celebrated their love and solidified their commitment to each other. After getting married, Lassie and Scott embarked on a new business venture, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. The Shack, owned by Lassie and Scott, started off slowly but eventually attracted a steady stream of customers, with weekends being particularly busy. After several successful years, the couple decided to sell the bar in 2000, seeking new opportunities despite its stable income. Following the sale, they moved to Lassie's hometown of Modesto, California, and purchased a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in an upscale neighborhood in October 2000. Lassie took on a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company. Lassie devoted herself to supporting Scott, taking care of the home, cooking, and cleaning. She made sure their home was always warm and inviting. In 2002, the couple received exciting news. Lassie was pregnant, and they were expecting a baby. Lassie and Scott were expecting a baby boy, with a due date set for February 10, 2003. They had already chosen the name Connor for their unborn child. On December 24, 2002, Scott stated that he left their house at 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Scott said he left Lassie at home on Christmas Eve morning with a busy day ahead of her. She was planning to watch a Martha Stewart show, clean the floor, bake Christmas cookies, and walk their dog, Mackenzie, at the park. However, one of their neighbors found Mackenzie wandering outside their home around 10:30 a.m. and returned the dog to their backyard. When Scott came home from fishing that afternoon, he said the house was empty, with Mackenzie in the yard, but no sign of Lassie. Her car was still parked in the driveway. Scott claimed he showered and washed his dirty fishing clothes as soon as he got home. After his shower, Scott realized Lassie was missing and became concerned. He called her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron, but they hadn't heard from her all day and were worried about her safety. As the day went on and Lassie remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to report her disappearance to the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police how urgent it was to find Lassie, who was 7 months pregnant with their baby, Connor. The police then questioned Scott about his whereabouts and activities on the day Lassie vanished. Scott told police he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from his home in Modesto, where he lived with his pregnant wife, Lassie. However, from the start, police suspected foul play in Lassie's disappearance. Initially, police didn't treat Lassie's case as suspicious after Scott and his mother-in-law filed a missing person report. Lassie's family defended Scott, and the couple seemed perfect, making it hard to imagine Scott harming his wife. As the investigation continued, police grew suspicious of Scott. About a month after Lassie vanished, they made a stunning discovery. Scott had 2 secret affairs and a long-term relationship with Amber Fry, who contacted police on December 30, 2002, after learning Scott was a suspect in Lassie's disappearance. Amber said she met Scott on November 20, 2002, and thought he was single. 2 weeks before Lassie's disappearance, Scott told Amber that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to kill his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to make a recorded phone call to Scott, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police informed Lassie's family about Scott's infidelities, and it was when they showed Lassie's mother a photo of Scott and Amber together that she became convinced of his guilt. The search for Lassie was highly comprehensive due to the involvement of the police, her loved ones, and numerous volunteers. In the first 2 days alone, More than 900 people participated in the search efforts. During a press conference, a police officer working on Lassie's case raised concerns that she may not have left her house voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lassie's disappearance sparked widespread media attention, with the tragic and intriguing tale of a beautiful young woman vanishing from her home on Christmas Eve, captivating the public's imagination. As the public sought answers and speculated about her disappearance, the spotlight on Lassie's case intensified. When Lassie Peterson vanished on December 24, 2002, a $25,000 reward was initially offered for information leading to her safe return. As the investigation yielded no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to boost awareness and gather more information. To keep Lassie's case in the public eye, posters were prominently displayed in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to spread the word. Months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a marshy area. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the east side of the bay's shore, about a mile away from where the baby was found. On April 18, 2003, DNA tests confirmed that the bodies were indeed those of Lassie and her unborn son, Connor. Lassie and Connor were laid to rest at Burwood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed disturbing evidence. The baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lassie's autopsy showed even more brutal injuries. 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso hollowed out with internal organs removed, and she was missing her head and limbs. The medical examiner concluded that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lassie's body after her death. Investigators from the FBI and Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lassie, looking for evidence of their involvement in her disappearance. The search turned up several crucial clues, including a hair found in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. After analyzing the hair, the FBI matched it to Lassie's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also thoroughly examined Scott's truck and warehouse, seeking any evidence linking him to Lassie's disappearance. The FBI searched Scott's boat and found a homemade anchor that he claimed was made from a 90-pound bag of concrete, which he had used to repair his driveway. However, the prosecution believed that Scott had created multiple anchors and used 4 of them to weigh down Lassie's body in San Francisco Bay. The bodies found in the bay were later identified as Lassie and Connor, leading to Scott's arrest near a golf course. Notably, Scott's appearance had changed significantly. His dark brown hair was now blonde. When arrested, Scott's vehicle was found to be packed with various items, including a large sum of cash, survival gear, and camping equipment. The police also discovered 4 cell phones and 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested to the police that Scott was attempting to flee the state. Scott's father offered an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's possession. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at a golf course. As for why Scott's car was packed, his father claimed it was because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media, who were camping outside his house at the time. Scott's trial began in June 2004, a year after his arrest. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case to the jury, arguing that Scott had killed Lassie because of his affair with Amber Frey. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to and following Lassie's disappearance, pointing out inconsistencies in his statements to the police. Scott initially told the police he was fishing on the day Lassie went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also noted that Scott asked the police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lassie was supposed to walk their dog, implying that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. Scott's defense team presented a strong argument in court, highlighting that Scott's history of infidelity did not necessarily prove he was guilty of murdering his wife. They reasoned that Scott would not give up his life for someone he had only dated 4 times. The defense suggested that Lassie's hair might have been found in Scott's boat because she had visited the marina with him before. During the trial, 2 of Lassie's relatives testified that Scott showed no emotional response when his pregnant wife went missing. New evidence emerged when a realtor testified that Scott tried to sell their home in January, a month after Lassie's disappearance. Additionally, a salesman revealed that Scott traded in Lassie's car after she vanished. The prosecution viewed these events as incriminating evidence against Scott. Amber Fry, Scott's mistress, took the stand and shared details of their affair. The jury listened to secret recordings of Amber's phone calls with Scott, including one where he lied about being in Paris when he was actually attending a vigil for his missing wife. During the trial, a hydrologist and tide expert testified that it was possible for Lassie's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to be fishing on the day Lassie went missing. However, the defense team argued that there was a lack of credible evidence directly linking Scott to the crime. Their theory was that someone had kidnapped Lacey on Christmas Eve 2002, holding her captive until she gave birth to Connor, and then disposing of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. The defense attorney emphasized that there was no concrete evidence to connect Scott directly to the crime, and that other suspects could have been responsible. A significant issue arose during the trial when a juror was removed and replaced with an alternate due to misconduct. The dismissed juror had conducted unauthorized research on the case, violating legal procedures. Additionally, the foreman of the jury asked to be removed, and it was determined that his removal was necessary to ensure a fair and just trial. On November 12, 2004, a California jury found Scott guilty of 2 murder counts: first-degree murder for killing his wife Lassie, and second-degree murder for killing their unborn son Connor. The charge of first-degree murder for Lassie's killing carried special circumstances because of the involvement of the fetus, making Scott eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial entered the penalty phase to determine his punishment. In this phase, the jury considered various factors, including Scott's prior criminal history, circumstances that aggravated the crime, and circumstances that mitigated it. The jury unanimously agreed that Scott should receive the death penalty. After reviewing the evidence, the judge upheld the jury's verdict. He concluded that Lassie's murder was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous, which led to Scott being sentenced to death. As is automatic in such cases, the sentence was appealed, and the California Supreme Court heard the case in June 2020. During the appeal, Scott's lawyers presented several arguments. They claimed that some potential jurors were unfairly dismissed, that 2 jurors were improperly allowed onto Scott's boat, and that the trial should have been moved to a different county due to biased questionnaire results, which showed that almost half of the potential jurors thought Scott was guilty before the trial even started. The state countered that there was no evidence to support the claim that any juror was unfairly dismissed, and that none of the 12 jurors who ultimately decided Scott's fate were biased. In August 2020, the United States Supreme Court upheld Scott's conviction, but overturned his death sentence. In 2004, a judge resentenced Scott to life in prison without parole, which led to his transfer from San Quentin State Prison to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Around the same time, on April 1, 2004, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, UVVA, into law. Lassie's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony. Lassie and Connor's law was designed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers were victims of violence. The legislation recognizes the unborn child as a separate legal entity from their mother, making it a crime to harm or kill the unborn child during an attack on a pregnant woman. The law acknowledges that an unborn child is a victim of violence and deserves the same rights and protections as any other human being. The case of Ronald Platt. On July 28, 1996, in South England, Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a day of fishing on their Brixham trawler, Mulcahy. After an unproductive day, they decided to venture further into an area known as the Roughs. They lowered their net into the water and waited. Soon, they felt the familiar pull of a heavy catch. John thought they had caught a big fish and decided to bring the net back to the surface. However, it wasn't a fish. John and his son were shocked and a dead body fell onto their deck. John quickly notified the Brixham Coast Guard. The body was badly decomposed, indicating it had been in the ocean for a while. Although fish had nibbled on it, the man was dressed neatly in a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. The police observed that his pockets were emptied, and he had no identification. The only distinguishing features were a badly smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was transferred to the medical examiner's office in Devon. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. The tattoo looked like a group of stars. The only serious injury was on his head. It was not fatal and, along with other bruises, appeared to be consistent with having been dragged along the seabed before being brought onto the boat. His lungs were filled with water. It was determined that he died from drowning, something common in the area given that the English Channel is right off the coast. The police suspected he might have fallen overboard during one of the ferry crossings. The only other way to identify him was through dental records. If he was a British citizen, his records would be available, so the examiner proceeded with this method. However, it would take some time. By chance, a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch. It was a Rolex Oyster self-winding watch, fully waterproof and needing motion to stay active for 48 hours. They could trace the ownership if it was genuine. By examining the watch, the investigators could determine that the man drowned on July 20, 1996, because the calendar feature showed the date as July 22. They also found a serial number hidden between the strap and the watch face. This number was sent to Rolex to check if the watch was authentic and if it had been serviced by the owner. Several weeks later, investigators identified him as Ronald Joseph Platt through Rolex records. The medical examiner confirmed this with dental records. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman. Records show he was born in Calgary, Canada, in 1945 before his family relocated to Britain. Ronald was unmarried and had previously served as a soldier in the British Army for his national service. Close friends described him as a quiet, introverted man. He loves his native Canada very much. He is also passionate about electronics and precision engineering, which led him to purchase a Rolex in Germany in 1967. It became one of his most treasured possessions. And his ex-partners noted that he would not even remove his watch to shower. With this information, investigators needed to determine Ronald how he ended up entangled in a fishing trawler. Detective Constable Ian Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case right from the start. Police discovered that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, far from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for further investigation. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to go to the address to help investigate the case. When Peter visited, the house was empty. He contacted the owner, who explained that the previous occupant had moved out some time ago, but provided the detective with a reference letter. The letter contained the forwarding address and contact number for someone named David Davis. Upon calling the provided number, Peter was able to reach David. The detective inquired about the relationship between Ronald and David before explaining that the body they discovered in Devon was possibly that of his friend. David agreed to visit the Essex police. Peter met with him and found he to be friendly and confident. However, David was quiet and didn't ask many questions about Ronald's death or how it was discovered. When asked, David mentioned that he and Ronald had been friends for several years. He told Peter that he hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months. The last time they met, he had lent Ronald money to start an electrical business in France. David believed that Ronald had been living in France all this time. During the interview, Peter discovered that the tattoo on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. David explained Ronald's affection for Canada. After sharing all the information he had, he left the station, promising to send Detective Peter a photo of Ronald. A few days later, Peter received the photo as promised. The Essex police had been able to conclude the investigation, arriving at the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the canal. This matched the story told by David. It had simply been an unfortunate accident. While the Essex case was being closed, Detective Constable Ian Clenaghan needed to resolve the loose ends on his side. He tried to contact David several times, but was unsuccessful. So, he turned to his colleague Peter in Essex for help in getting in touch with David. Then Peter agreed and visited David. The meeting took place in the rural area of Essex, where there were only 4 houses, each with a name instead of a traditional number. Peter knocked on the first door, and an elderly couple answered. When they asked Peter whom he was looking for, he gave them the name David Davis. The couple informed Peter that their neighbor was not Davis, but Ronald Platt. They then described Ronald to Peter, and he realized that it was the same man he had met before. Redmond realized something was amiss. He reached out to Clenaghan in Devon and shared how, by pure luck, he knew more another part of the story. Detectives from both areas now understood that the situation was more complicated than at first. Peter turned his attention to collecting details about David, the man impersonating his deceased friend, Ronald. Then Peter returned to visit the elderly couple he knew as Frank and Aubrey. They recounted the story of Ronald Platt, his much younger wife, and their 2 young children. Ronald and his family often vacationed in Devon because they had a yacht there, but the specific name of the place couldn't be recalled. In Devon, Clenaghan began reviewing the evidence and started by interviewing old witnesses. His first visit was to John. When questioned, John explained that the net used had pulled up a 10-pound anchor along with Ronald's body. John had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it to his mother to sell. Luckily, the anchor wasn't sold, allowing investigators to recover and preserve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He reached out to Ronald's brother Brian, who mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's former partner of 13 years. Investigators visited Elaine and uncovered the link between Ronald and David. Elaine had met David in 1991 while she was working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She described David as tall, engaging, and charming. They then talked about David moving to Yorkshire, and the subject turned to jobs. David wanted Elaine to join his company. Elaine mentioned it would be temporary because she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada. David, trying to win her over, suggested he could help them save money for the move. Soon, Elaine started working as his executive assistant and later introduced Ronald to David, leading the 2 men to quickly become friends. Ronald and Elaine was fascinated by David's boastful stories and admired his luxurious lifestyle. David offered them to become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Initially, Elaine was hesitant about the offer. David explained why he didn't want his name associated with the company. He claimed that his ex-wife was a wealthy doctor in New York who continued to demand alimony from him. At this point, Ronald and Elaine had come to trust David and believed that David was actually trying to keep distance himself from his ex-wife. David sends Elaine and Ronald to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf and gradually draws them into his plot. On Christmas Day 1992, David invited the couple to spend the day with him and his daughter Noelle. After a satisfying meal, they sat down to exchange gifts. Elaine received a card titled "The Ultimate Gift." David had promised to buy Elaine and Ronald 2 tickets to Canada if they used them before February 1993. Elaine felt overwhelmed by the short notice, but Ronald was ecstatic. His lifelong dream of returning to Canada was coming true, thanks to the generosity of David, a man he considered a true friend. David persuaded them that it was better to begin their new life sooner rather. He quickly started preparing for their departure. David suggested to both Elaine and Ronald that they should have stamps made of their signatures, in case he needed to sign any documents urgently. David would also keep their driver's licenses with him in case he needed to prove their identity. This request wasn't difficult for the couple because they trusted David, who had just helped them get started. So, in February 1993, Elaine and Ronald flew to Canada to start their new lives. Canada did not provide the better opportunities Elaine and Ronald had hoped for. They arrived in the country during winter, found little work, and financial struggles quickly led to relationship issues. They attempted to overcome these challenges, but the increasing tension caused them to grow apart. 5 months later, Elaine went back to England to be a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no plans to return to Canada. David, now a family friend, was invited to the wedding. At the event, he spoke with Elaine and asked about Ronald. He was saddened to learn that she would not be going back to Canada and that her relationship with Ronald had ended. David attempted to persuade Elaine to reconsider and give Ronald another chance in Canada. When she declined, David suddenly changed tactics. He quickly arranged to move himself, leaving Elaine only with his mobile number. Their friendship eventually faded, and the calls stopped as well. Elaine and Ronald were no longer in touch. After leaving Canada, she had not communicated with her ex-lover Ronald or her former close friend David. So, when David reached out to Elaine late in 1996, she didn't think much of the unexpected conversation, as they had little to say to each other after such a long time. David did not mention Ronald, and that was the end of it. He did not tell her that Ronald had died. After the interview, Elaine told the police she suspected David might have been involved in Ronald's death. Elaine provided important clues about the relationship between David and Ronald, but investigators needed more concrete evidence. They started interviewing witnesses after the wedding in Harrogate. David quickly fled with his family to Devon, where he began using the name Ronald Platt. He introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boys and other times Noelle Platt. It was well known that he owned a yacht, which raised further suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and David together a month before Ronald's body was found. They are said to have booked rooms at the Steam Packet Inn as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, the police were certain that David was lying about Ronald and what he knew about his death. They just needed one more piece of evidence. By examining David's mobile phone records, they found that calls were made from the same area where the medical examiner estimated Ronald had drowned. The Essex police planned a sting operation to arrest David on suspicion of Ronald's murder. They waited for him at the Chelmsford train station after receiving a tip-off from Elaine, who had arranged to meet David for coffee. However, David managed to slip away. Peter then was decided to drive by David's family home. In that place, Peter noticed activity, but he did not act immediately and requested reinforcements. Peter was assumed that David might be armed as they prepared to take action. A taxi arrived in the driveway, and David quickly escaped when the taxi sped off. The police chased him and eventually arrested him, pointing a gun at him. David surrendered without incident. What the police did not know was that this was just the tip of the iceberg. David was arrested, and his fingerprints were taken. Searching them in an international database revealed another twist to an already tangled plot. The fingerprints were identified as belonging to a man named Albert Johnson Walker, who was ranked number 4 on Interpol's wanted list and was Canada's most wanted fugitive. Albert's story starts in Canada, 6 years before Ronald's body was found in the Atlantic Ocean. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, on August 9, 1945, Albert always had big dreams. Although he dropped out of high school, but he worked as a bank teller and spent much of his free time socializing in Ontario. It was at a social event that he met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. Albert proposed to Barbara after just a 4-day romance, and they got married in 1968. They quickly began their family, having 3 daughters and 4 sons, and raised them in Paris, Ontario. After years of assisting others with financial solutions, Albert, along with Barbara, launched a freelance bookkeeping business. The business flourished, and within a decade, it grew to 6 branches with over 30 employees. Friends were eager to invest with them, but Albert was secretly diverting their money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Eventually, problems began to surface. Albert's marriage ended due to his numerous affairs. The people he swindled money from began to get suspicious, so in 1990 Walker decided to leave before the situation became more tense. He told friends he was taking their 15-year-old daughter, Sheena, on a skiing trip to Europe, and used this as a cover to escape. Barbara realized what was happening and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her as a missing person. The police tried to chase him, but they lost track of him in London. He assumed a new identity, taken from a client, and started going by David Wallace Davis, while Sheena was renamed Noel. Although he managed to evade the authorities, the name David Davis was still linked to his true identity. He needed a new identity, and he had the perfect opportunity when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a very small circle of friends and was obsessed with living in Canada. Albert took advantage of this information. Everything was set in motion and Albert finally got the identity he needed. However, the plans fell apart when Ronald contacted Albert in 1995. Life in Canada wasn't as he had imagined it. Ronald informed Albert that he would return to Essex to settle near David. The solid foundation Albert was building started to show signs of trouble. Having 2 individuals named Ronald Platt in the same area with identical birth details was problematic for Albert. So, he devised a plan. He bought a yacht called Lady Jane and took his family and Ronald to Totnes in Devon to celebrate its launch. During the visit, they bought a new 10-pound anchor, which later turned out to be crucial evidence in an investigation. After returning to Essex, Albert invited Ronald back to Devon for another weekend, just 2 friends enjoying the coast and fishing. Albert sailed the Lady Jane out into open waters, far from the view of anyone on shore. He then struck Ronald on the head with the anchor, rendering him unconscious. Albert searched Ronald's pockets to remove any identification, secured the anchor to Ronald's belt, and threw him overboard. Albert believes it was the perfect murder. However, Albert made one critical mistake. He forgot to remove Ronald's Rolex watch, which eventually unveiled the meticulously planned crime. Albert's trial began in 1998, with evidence presented in court, including the anchor found entangled with Ronald's body in a net. Forensic experts determined that the head injury matched the shape of the anchor. Traces of zinc were found on the pants belt Ronald's, matching the zinc on the anchor. Albert had used the anchor to weigh Ronald down by attaching it to his belt. Further investigation of the Lady Jane revealed more evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were discovered on a yacht cushion, and his fingerprint was found on the carrier bag used to transport the anchor back to the Lady Jane. Blood stains were discovered near the railway tracks at Albert's residence. The habit of accumulating documents harmed him, as they were confiscated and used to demonstrate his fraudulent businesses and deceitful activities. However, it was the testimonies of Elaine and Sheena that ultimately condemned him. Elaine's testimony demonstrated to the court that Albert stood to lose significantly if Ronald returned to England. Sheena dealt the decisive blow. She could not provide a clear alibi for Albert on the weekend of the murder. She stated that he had been on the yacht and appeared disheveled and agitated when he returned late on the murder day. Sheena's testimony marked a new phase in the investigation. She spoke in court about her life of fear with her father, his charm, and how she felt like a victim, just like anyone else who encountered him. When Albert took the stand, he appeared very charming and confident in court. He claimed that Sheena insisted on joining him and conceded to committing fraud and other illegal activities, but he firmly denied murdering Ronald. He explained that the blood found on the yacht was because Ronald had accidentally hit his head while they were fishing. Nevertheless, the jury quickly saw through his falsehoods and convicted him after only 2 hours of deliberation. High Court Justice Neil Butterfield addressed Albert, stating that the murder was carefully planned and executed with chilling efficiency. Justice Butterfield said that Albert was a plausible, intelligent, and ruthless man who posed a serious threat to anyone who stood in his way. Albert Johnson Walker was sentenced to 15 years to life in 2005 and was allowed to return to Canada to serve his sentence in 2007. At the age of 61, he was sentenced to 4 more years in prison to run concurrently with his sentence. In 2015, Albert applied for parole but withdrew his application at the last moment. Now, at age 75, the Canadian Parole Board has denied his application for day and full parole. His request to travel unaccompanied to Vancouver Island for a personal development program was also denied. It seems likely he will never be released. Albert seems to have accomplished the perfect crime. But then karma caused him to be exposed. If it weren't for Ronald Platt's real Rolex watch and a series of coincidences, he probably would have escaped legal punishment. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Allamon Springs, Florida. She grew up in a happy family with an older brother, a younger sister, and loving parents. Her father traveled frequently for work in several states, so he was not always home. As a child, Jessica was active and cheerful. She enjoyed spending time outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when she was 9 years old, her family decided to visit her grandparents for Easter. That morning, her father left the house to do some shopping, while her mother stayed behind to clean up and prepare for the trip. After school, Jessica came home and asked her mother if she could go out to play in the apartment complex. The area was relatively safe because it was far from the main road and had many trees around. Her mother agreed but asked Jessica to play only in the yard. A few hours later, around 6 p.m., Jessica's father returned home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was surprised because her daughter was supposed to be in the yard waiting for her father, but he insisted that she was not there. The parents went outside and searched the yard but did not find Jessica. Feeling worried, they decided to ask the neighbors in the hope that someone had seen their daughter. One neighbor said that he had seen Jessica in the front yard, sitting on the couch reading a book. But that did not help in finding Jessica. When darkness fell and their daughter was still missing, they decided to call the police. The police arrived a few minutes later and began searching and interviewing the neighbors. Despite their efforts, they could not find Jessica, so they expanded the search area to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police station received an unexpected call. The caller's voice was drowned out by loud noise, but the operator could still hear it. The caller revealed that the police would find the missing girl near a water pump station a few miles from her home. The police rushed to the pump station to check on the caller's instructions and witnessed a heartbreaking scene. Before them was the body of a girl lying near the station, hidden in a black trash bag. Just a few meters from the road, the pump station was under a bridge and could not be seen. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and turned her body over to the medical examiner. Meanwhile, investigators focused on finding the person who made the 911 call and reported the news, as they believed the call came from the killer. But there was a challenge. The call was made from a public phone at a gas station less than a mile from the crime scene, and by the time the police arrived, the perpetrator was gone. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but it was quite a challenge. A public phone could have many fingerprints. Furthermore, investigators realized that the criminal could have wiped the phone after making the call or used gloves. Experts concluded that Jessica was killed elsewhere and her body was moved to the water pump station. Marks on the ground in front of the pump station suggested that the killer could have dragged Jessica's body from a car and dragged it across the ground. Jessica's clothes were intact except for one shoe. Police could not find it in her pocket or in the surrounding area. The only clue found at the crime scene was tire marks on the ground. Police could not be sure that they belonged to the killer's car, but they took pictures of them. Medical experts performed an autopsy and determined that Jessica died from strangulation based on marks on her face and neck. It appeared that the killer did it with his bare hands. A hamburger was also found in her stomach, consumed less than an hour before her death. Her mother said she had not given Jessica anything of the sort that day, leading police to believe the food had been provided to her by the killer. Experts also found no signs of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unclear. Police initially suspected Jessica's parents because neither had a solid alibi for the time of her disappearance. Jessica's mother claimed that she was packing her belongings in the apartment, while her father went shopping. However, both had the opportunity to commit the crime, theoretically. Police were trying to figure out how the killer had taken Jessica out of the complex's courtyard without anyone noticing or without her calling for help. This led them to suspect that the killer may have known the victim and that she had left voluntarily. Another factor that supported this theory was the killer's tone during the 911 call. Although experts tried to erase the recording, they still noticed sadness and regret in the killer's voice, as if he truly regretted his actions. The killer's actions when calling 911 spoke volumes. It is possible that the killer did this for the thrill of toying with the police and manipulating the investigation, or that he truly regretted his actions and wanted to somehow alleviate that feeling. However, upon closer examination, investigators are inclined to the second option, that the killer truly regretted his actions. The police checked Jessica's father's car and found an important detail in the trunk. It was a roll of black garbage bags similar to the one in which the victim's body was found. However, after analysis, experts determined that this bag was not similar to the other bags in the father's car. Therefore, Jessica's father was eliminated as a suspect and investigators turned their attention to other people. Forensic experts studied the victim's clothes and body for clues. They found several important traces. There was a large amount of dog hair on the victim's body, which was very strange because Jessica's family did not own dogs. This suggested that the dog might belong to the killer. They also found human hair on the girl's body, which belonged to an unidentified white male. However, it took experts a few days to extract the man's DNA profile. Two types of strange fibers were also found on the victim's clothing. After analysis, experts concluded that one type of fiber could have come from the car seat cover and the other from the carpet. This further supported the theory that the victim had been killed elsewhere and taken to the water station by car. Experts attempted to identify the breed of the dog from the hairs on Jessica's clothing using an FBI database. This database contains microscopic photographs of hairs from many different dog breeds and has proven useful in criminal cases. The process of identifying the breed of the dog is done by comparing the hairs to samples from the database and eliminating each breed one by one. They eventually concluded that the hair on the victim's clothes came from a Shar-Pei. This suggested that the killer may have owned such a dog and that the hair had gotten on Jessica's clothes while she was in the killer's car or at their home. Investigators developed a preliminary theory that the killer may have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to McDonald's for a hamburger, then taken her home and killed her. Meanwhile, experts were also trying to improve the phone call recording. However, this was a challenging task. To solve this problem, detectives sought help from NASA. NASA has advanced tools for improving recordings, originally designed to improve recordings from space. They agreed to help and provided the police with a higher quality recording. Experts needed a voice sample from the suspect to compare with the call recording and determine a match. Because detectives suspected that the killer might know Jessica, they decided to play the recording of the call to her mother. Jessica's mother listened to the recording and said that the voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't remember who it belonged to. However, after listening to the recording a second time, Jessica's mother recognized the voice as that of a neighbor who lived in the same complex. She added information to detectives that the man often walked a Shar-Pei in the yard. Police quickly identified the man as James Crow, 35. During the initial investigation, investigators interviewed him along with other neighbors. He said that he saw Jessica in the yard while walking her dog. They talked for a while, and then he left. Detectives looked into his background and discovered that James had no criminal record. He lives with his wife, a nurse, and is currently unemployed, spending most of his time walking the streets with a Shar-Pei named Pumpkin. The detectives realized that James's voice and the fact that he owned a dog of the same breed were not enough to arrest him. So they obtained a search warrant for his car. During the search, they discovered two troubling clues. Under the front passenger seat, they found an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious since Jessica had eaten a hamburger. Experts also noticed that his car had brand new tires, as if they had barely been used. The police discovered that James had replaced the tires on the day of Jessica's murder, even though his previous tires were not very old and could have lasted for several more years. James claimed to have left the old tires at a car repair shop, which was unusual since they were not old at all. The police went to the service center to investigate. When they arrived, only one of James's tires was left. They compared its tread pattern to those found near the body. However, the results showed that they did not match. Detectives were not 100% certain that the tire tracks on the ground were left by the killer's car, as it was possible that the tire tracks were from a maintenance vehicle that regularly visited the area. Police searched James's apartment and found a box containing rolls of trash bags that matched the bags found on the victim's body. Although not direct evidence, detectives decided to investigate whether there was any way to determine if the bags collected at the scene and at James's home came from the same manufacturer. However, identifying these bags was difficult because they had no distinct markings, and there were hundreds of similar manufacturers. To address this challenge, detectives contacted Roberts, who was in charge of quality control at a bag manufacturing company. Roberts was able to identify the factory that produced the bags found in James's apartment through the code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. This product was manufactured at a facility in Virginia. Experts discovered that small amounts of iron or titanium were present in the bag's composition depending on their color. Since the materials are constantly changing during the manufacturing process, the ratio of plastic to iron or titanium actually changes daily. Detectives decided to take bags from James's apartment and the crime scene to measure the ratio of elements in the plastic using high-intensity X-rays. This gave them a very accurate ratio. Careful analysis showed that the ratio of iron to titanium in both plastic bags was the same, which suggested that they were manufactured on the same day and even in the same batch. The process of manufacturing garbage bags often leaves a small amount of microscopic debris on the machine, which is normal. However, when the plastic sheets are cut into bags, this debris forms small streaks that can be seen with the naked eye. Each roll of bags will have a unique pattern made up of these streaks. The pattern on each bag was created by particles of debris moving down the conveyor belt, which were then replaced by new particles. As a result, the same pattern would be retained over several hundred feet of fabric. This suggests that the two bags were not only produced in the same batch, but also within a few hours of each other. When comparing the bags from the suspect's apartment in the crime scene, experts found that the lines on them matched remarkably well. Furthermore, after production, the bags were rolled into a bundle by a machine, but the machine often did this unevenly. Without close observation, these deviations were barely noticeable, making the rolls appear smooth. When examining the edges of the bags, there were small folds and wrinkles that formed a unique pattern similar to streaks. Experts compared and found that the pattern on the bags from James's apartment matched exactly the pattern on the bags at the crime scene. This meant that with a high probability, the bag from the crime scene had been taken from James' apartment. In addition, forensic analysts compared fibers found on Jessica's clothing with those from the carpet in James' apartment and the seat cover of his car. The results showed that both samples matched. Furthermore, an audio expert compared the recording of the 911 call with James' voice sample and concluded that they matched. Although the experts had collected a significant amount of evidence, the detectives still faced the major problem that all the evidence collected was circumstantial. However, the police were confident of James's involvement in Jessica's murder and decided to arrest him. Since James continued to deny his guilt, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented their report on how the crime occurred. James spent a lot of time outside with his dog, and all the local kids knew him well. They often played with Pumpkin, James' dog, and therefore, they trusted him. Jessica was no exception, and this trust may have led to her becoming a victim. The police provided an explanation of what happened on the day Jessica went missing. At that time, James was walking his dog and saw her sitting alone on a bench. He approached her, started chatting, and then invited her to McDonald's to buy her a hamburger. Jessica knew James quite well, so she agreed. According to the police, on that day, James noticed Jessica sitting alone on a bench while he was walking his dog and started chatting with her. He offered to take her to McDonald's, promising to buy her a hamburger, and Jessica agreed because she knew him well. After eating at the restaurant, he may have taken her back to the apartment complex and invited her to his home. He may have asked her to play with Pumpkin. The presence of carpet fibers from his living room on Jessica's clothes suggests she was there on the day of her death. According to the investigation, James may have intended to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Based on the autopsy results, the perpetrator not only strangled her with his bare hands but also pressed his palms against her face. This may be evidence that she tried to scream, causing the perpetrator to panic and attack. After Jessica's death, James placed her body in a garbage bag and put it in his car to transport it to a disposal site without arousing suspicion. James drove a few miles to a nearby water station, where he left Jessica's body. He then returned to his house, perhaps after stopping at a gas station to make a phone call. During the preliminary hearing, James' attorneys attempted to dismiss all available evidence, arguing that there was no solid evidence to prove their client's guilt. However, in capital cases, the standard of proof is much higher. In James's case, he had a very good chance of avoiding the death penalty. Based on these facts, a plea deal was proposed to James. Under the deal, James would admit to second-degree murder and receive a 40-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. In the summer of 1998, 2 years after the murder, James agreed to the deal. Although he was not required to disclose details of the crime, James mentioned that part of his decision was to spare Jessica's family the long ordeal of a trial. The prosecution believed James had shown remorse, as demonstrated by his 911 call. However, the purpose of this call remains unclear. The only plausible explanation is that James genuinely wanted to reduce his guilt for such a serious crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy with the deal because they wanted their daughter's killer to receive the death penalty. They were also disappointed that James refused to confess to the crime. What was even more disappointing was that James did not serve his entire prison sentence due to poor health. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49, taking the secret of Jessica's murder with him. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. Not much is known about her childhood except that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who lived in a cozy wooden house in Madison, Alabama. Shaninthea's childhood and youth passed as normal as any other girl of her time. Shanynthia was a young girl with curly brown hair, slim and beautiful. She was always surrounded by loyal friends and showed outstanding talent. Shanynthia was full of creative spirit, had a unique talent for songwriting and a passion for music. She expressed herself through singing and attracted the attention of the local people. In addition to singing, Shanynthia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She had the ability to turn everyday moments into works of art in front of the camera. Despite her diverse interests, Shanynthia was a charitable woman who attended church regularly and took good care of her family. Everything in Shaninthia's life seemed to be preordained and promised a bright future. Shanynthia was 14 when she met Daryl Clayton through mutual friends. They quickly became friends and their relationship became more serious after graduating from high school, becoming an official couple. They spent a lot of time together and were considered serious and stable young people. However, their crime records had some questionable details. Both had minor crimes such as traffic violations and disorderly conduct on the street. In 2008, Daryl was charged with assaulting a woman, even though the act was unintentional. He faced severe punishment, but all charges were later dropped. Shanynthia and Daryl were not officially married but lived together. In 2008, they had a son named Dee. Shanynthia became a caring mother, taking care of not only her son but also Daryl's 2 children from a previous relationship. Daryl's mother, Sonia Clayton, considered Shanynthia a family member, not just her son's lover. However, their relationship did not last. Although the reason is unknown, they kept in touch after the breakup. For Daryl, Shanynthia was still a good wife and a caring mother. When her son Dee was only 2 years old, Shanynthia was involved in a small incident, possibly a parking ticket or a small argument. This was insignificant compared to what would happen in her future. Marrying Martin Gardner opened a new chapter in Shaninthia's life. This union brought joy and stability to her life. Shanynthia won Martin over with her kindness and love for her children, which was reflected in her gentleness and intelligence. Their love story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to live together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives. After the celebration, they had their first son, Telone, followed by baby Saya in 2014. Soon after, their 2 daughters Savi and Yazzie were born, bringing happiness to their family. In total, Martin and Shanynthia have 4 children together and 1 child from Shaninthia's previous relationship. As a young mother, her children have always been her number 1 priority. She enjoys working part-time at Children's Hospital and is actively involved in a fundraising organization to help children. It is her passion and purpose in life. On a normal Friday, July 1st, 2016. Around noon, Shanynthia called her husband, Martin. Her voice was completely calm. She told him that she was going to take the children to the movies. There was no indication that something terrible was going to happen that day. At that moment, they was having a quiet conversation when a sudden and confusing event occurred. Shanynthia suddenly changed her attitude and took a kitchen knife into the living room. She attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yazzie, leaving her defenseless and in a terrible situation. Yazzie's life was cut short abruptly by the person she loved and was closest to. Dee, the eldest child, was only 7 years old and witnessed this horrific scene. He was too young to understand what was happening, but he knew that he needed to act to save his younger brother and sister. Panicked and desperate, Dee ran out of the house. Shanynthia continued to hold the knife and chase her son. She rushed after Dee, but he screamed loudly, attracting the attention of the neighbors. Several neighbors heard his screams and rushed outside to see what was happening. They witnessed a horrifying scene that they could not forget in their minds. When they realized that Dee was being chased, but Shanynthia stopped. However, the horror was not over yet. Shanynthia returned to the house, where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went upstairs to the bedroom where the children were lying. Those were the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the horrifying scene quickly called the emergency services, asking for help and rescuing Dee and his siblings. None of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. The sheriff arrived at the scene and witnessed a strange scene inside the house at 7449 Southern Hill Road. They found Shanynthia covered in blood and her 4 children lying motionless, lifeless. The scene left everyone in shock. Shanynthia sat there, holding her cell phone and slowly dialing her husband, Martin. Her voice was soft but cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had happened in their lives was a horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and the special forces arrived at the scene, everything was over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been home to the Happy Gardner family. Blood and horror were everywhere. Investigators found a bloody knife and witnessed the horrific incident. Chaplains came to help and were shocked by what had happened. Professionals were also ready to assist Dee, who was suffering from a horror that required immediate intervention. Shanynthia was arrested and held without bail. Her trial is scheduled for July 5th. The horrific events unfolding in Shanynthia Gardner's life have left society unable to remain indifferent. Although she has been portrayed as a monster, Shanynthia is still a mother and partner who radiates love, care, and joy. Her co-worker, Michelle Jaiman, has defended Shanynthia on social media and spoken out about the injustice of the charges. Michelle also emphasized the importance of considering postpartum depression in cases like this. Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that infanticide by mothers is rare and often accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed to the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, an expert in postpartum psychology and health, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She emphasized that the two conditions are completely different, with different symptoms. In Shaninthia's case, Dr. Diane doubts that women with postpartum depression would commit such acts. Instead, she favors the possibility that Shanynthia suffered from psychosis. The investigation into Shanynthia Gardner's case has been fraught with difficulties. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, has chosen not to comment on the case to the media in its early stages, saying it is too early to discuss it. On July 5, 2016, Shanynthia did not speak at her trial, appearing only via video. Judge Lambert questioned her, but Shanynthia did not respond. After the trial, she was taken to the Institute of Mental Health. Shaninthia's family members were present in court but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor, Jennifer Nichols, plans to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. In January 2017, Shanynthia was formally charged with 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and chilling investigation continues, leaving the community waiting for justice and answers to many unanswered questions. The hearing was attended by Shaninthia's family members on the day of the tragedy. Sonia, Drill's mother, must have been devastated when she heard the news of the horrific tragedy. She rushed to the scene in a search for her nephew D. Sonia asserted that this action was completely unlike the Shaninthia she knew. Initially, she believed that something supernatural or demonic had caused the tragedy. However, as time passed and the initial shock subsided, Sonia began to consider possible reasons. She theorized that the couple may have been in the process of divorce. Shaninthia, fearful of raising 5 children on her own, may have made the terrifying decision to end it all. However, despite these speculations, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shaninthia she knew was not the person capable of such a terrible act. Dee's father did not believe Shaninthia was guilty. Although he was not the official guardian, he visited his son regularly after his separation from Shaninthia. However, the last time he saw his son was in November 2014. He noticed that Shaninthia was becoming more extreme in her actions and decisions. All attempts to contact her son failed and he was banned from interfering in her life. Shaninthia's friends and family soon noticed a sudden change in her. She began to show unusual symptoms, from feeling irritable to deep anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, leading many to suspect that she was suffering from postpartum depression. The sudden change in Shaninthia's behavior shocked those around her. She had been a strong, dependable woman who had everything under control. But now, she seemed to have lost her temper, leaving many wondering what had happened. The first signs of trouble appeared in March 2015. Friends and family were puzzled. One day, Shaninthia left work early, picked up her 5 children, and drove off in an unknown direction. Her husband, Martin, thought his wife was just taking the children for a walk and relaxing in the park, as was her usual routine. However, after several hours, Martin was confused and decided to call the police. Shaninthia drove from Memphis to Corinth, 74 miles east, with her 5 children. She did not know anyone there and had no apparent reason for being there. She was later found in the emergency room at St. Francis Hospital, but police did not disclose any details. She had superficial cuts on her neck and wrists, possibly from a suicide attempt, but her children were too young to understand what was happening. After being brought home, Shaninthia began to act strangely. She told her husband Martin that someone had threatened their family, but did not provide any further information. This shocked Martin, who had never had any previous threats. When she was with family and friends, Shaninthia complained about her job and felt bad about it. She then began to say that some of her co-workers wanted to hurt her. Despite the unusual signs, Shaninthia did not exhibit abusive or violent behavior toward her children or others. The wait for trial was long and difficult, with significant delays due to multiple psychiatric evaluations of the defendant. In 2021, the final non-jury trial took place. The defense focused on Shaninthia's mental illness argument. The prosecutor acknowledged her mental condition, but argued that the defendant still had the ability to distinguish right from wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Ultimately, Shelby County Criminal Court Judge James rejected the defense. In December 2021, Shaninthia Gardner was found guilty on all charges against her. In February 2022, Shaninthia, 34, appeared in court to receive her sentence, with her husband Martin present. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder and 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Shaninthia will only be eligible for parole after serving 51 years, including the 5 years she has already served before sentencing. She will be eligible for parole at age 80, about 46 years from now. After the hearing, the prosecutor expressed approval of the sentence, saying it satisfied Martin's desire for justice for his children. Martin also felt relieved to know that Shanynthia would no longer have the opportunity to harm any more children. An evening vigil was held at Sonia family's apartment complex to remember the victims. Sonia stood among a crowd of neighbors, relatives, and police. Attendees held red and white candles, praying for the soul of the deceased. The Baptist minister said this was the first step in healing the community, and everyone could only support the surviving child and his father through this difficult time. Martin did not attend the memorial service because he was too sad. Sonia spoke to the press on his behalf. The leadership of the children's hospital where Shanynthia worked also sent condolences. Martin's colleagues set up a social media page to help him arrange the funeral for his 4 children. During the service, Martin spoke about his family and children in an emotional and noble way. His words showed admirable resilience. At the end of his speech, Martin emphasized that he would always remember the happy image of his family, with Shanynthia and the children by his side. This is a precious memory that he will cherish forever.